Hey, hey, hey. Mike Sauter and Mike Martin back with you today for the Regeneration podcast. Michael Martin, say hello to your adoring fans.
Hello, my adoring
Yeah.
fans. Yeah.
What's your week like?
I didn't catch a swarm.
Oh, really? You had mentioned
Straighten
that.
out. I thought I would. Well, they were checking it out. I still could. But yeah, I moved a lot of fences this week, electric fences.
Yeah.
And
Let me ask you about a swarm, though. So I started a hive just a couple of weeks ago. It was like one of these things, with inflation.
mhm.
Why not buy some things you've always wanted that can earn you money? So I worked on my topsoil a lot this year and bought some, organic amendments, and I did a few other things. But this beehive, and the stuff I was reading said, if we don't catch a swarm pretty early, in July at the latest, is that your understanding too? Then we
Yeah.
might have to wait until next spring.
Yes.
Okay.
And you might want to think about buying a nuke,
Which is
a nucleus. So it's already
okay.
an established
Yeah, right,
colony.
right. Yeah.
With a laying queen. And here they cost about $150, maybe
That's not bad.
180.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to start because you might even get honey the first year.
Oh,
Some
really?
people sell package bees, which
Mhm.
is not, I don't think it's a good way to do it. And they're usually less money, but you certainly won't get honey the first year.
Yeah.
But if you can catch a swarm, that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. Didn't you say Rudolf Steiner said catching a swarm is the best way?
Well,
And is a nuke? Let me introduce today's topic. How about that? Today it's Michael. Quite often we have guests, but it's Michael Martin and yours truly, Mike Sauter, talking just with each other. We're going to introduce people who may never have even heard the name Rudolf Steiner. Probably more people have heard the name but don't know much about him, and maybe a few of our listeners and a few people out there know more about him than we do. But his name has come up in at least 80% of our previous podcasts in one way, shape, or form. And Michael was a teacher in what some people call a Steiner school, a Waldorf school, but he has a lot more knowledge than I do. So today's format is going to be me asking him some questions about Rudolf Steiner. So let's start with bees, then let's go into the bio after that. Rudolf Steiner on bees. A swarm was best?
Well, natural swarming. There's a way of splitting hives people do. So because the bees always have what they call queen cells in the hive, right?
Okay.
So if you have queen cells, that means it's like an emergency break glass kind of situation. And so if something happens to the queen, they make a new queen, right?
Gotcha.
And what happens? So that's the best way to propagate bees is by, according to Rudolf Steiner and a lot of natural beekeeping people, is let them swarm naturally. Yeah. Because the bees, they know which one's the better queen than you do, right?
Right.
Yeah, because you'll have 5, 6, maybe 8 queen cells in there. The bees know which one's the best one.
And so when you buy a nuke, these bees again, the breeder is taking out the queen, they're forming a new queen, then they mail that to me. No, tell me.
So when they form a nuke, well, they'll split a hive usually, which is not the optimum, but it's a good way.
Yeah.
I just keep in mind what you're dealing with. And what happens is then, so if you split a hive, you have a queen there, you'll split it with some queen cells. And then the bees will pick which one to have the queen, and usually it works. So it's a kind of artificial swarm you're creating.
Gotcha.
But it's better if you can catch one.
Yeah,
but it's not easy.
Like that old time.
Not easy to catch one. Not easy to catch one.
Are you more likely to catch it? Like you could live in the suburbs. We live in the country, and behind us is a lot of let me call it forever wild. I don't think it's actually deemed forever wild, but there's just nothing goes on in there. There's pine trees and bramble. Is it more likely that we'd catch a swarm because we're surrounded by kind of more wild?
Could be. I mean, there's some concern in the bee community, the scientific community, about whether or not there are actually any wild swarms left, or wild colonies left, because of varroa mites and
Right.
stuff like that. Which, because what'll happen is, you say you have your beekeeper in your colony is being decimated by varroa. They get weak, and what happens when they're weak is that you'll have a situation which is called robbing. So, could be feral bees, could be bees from another apiary. They'll come in and rob the honey out of the hive. But if they do that and your hive is sick, then they catch the sickness.
Yeah.
And they spread it around that way. So there's some question whether or not there are any feral feral colonies left.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, but you still might catch one from some.
I'm going to catch a feral
beekeeper.
hive. Yeah, I'm going to catch a feral hive, and I'm going to catch Sasquatch or something.
You might.
Yeah. Cool. So Rudolf Steiner, and maybe bees will come in again.
Bees will come in.
Austrian polymath, genius in, practitioner in so many fields. Give us a background of him.
Well, he grew up in what's now Croatia in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and German-speaking family. He was his father apparently was a free thinker, and he ran. He was like the station master of the railway. So young Rudy Steiner spent a lot of time at that rail station. But he was also very attracted as a kid to the mass, and he served as an altar boy in his local parish. Went to school. It was precocious. I mean, he was precociously clairvoyant as well. I think he was young. I mean, not a teenager yet, maybe 8 or 10 years old, and he saw a relative, a cousin or somebody who had just committed suicide appeared to him and appealed to him for help. And he was just a kid. So he was kind of naturally clairvoyant in that way. But he did not go to the gymnasium. He went to the Realschule, which is the technical school, and kind of came into the study of philosophy kind of naturally, and eventually went to study at university, though he didn't, because he did not go to the gymnasium. He had to teach himself Greek and Latin, as he was not in that trajectory. But he was just precocious intellectually, and so he does that, and he studies amongst other people under Franz Brentano, who's kind of the godfather of modern phenomenology. And I don't know if they were classmates or not, but they were certainly in the same generation. He Edmund Husserl, the founder of phenomenology, was I can't remember if he was a year older or a year younger than Steiner, but they both studied with Franz Brentano, though I don't know if they knew each other. Though Steiner certainly knew of Husserl's work and was not too crazy. He wasn't impressed. He was not impressed.
So that's clear. He read Husserl and was not impressed.
He was.
What do you think he took umbrage with the most?
I don't know. The only thing I encountered is there are what are called conferences with teachers. So he was talking to the teachers of the first Waldorf school, at their faculty meeting, and he said some kind of offhand remark. He said, "You want to do phenomenology, but not that stuff that Husserl's doing. That's not going to help you at all."
Interesting. That's helpful for me to know, because I've read both, and I wouldn't have picked up. I'm not getting a completely different vibe from them when I read them both. Also, I'm not saying it's the same thing either.
Yeah. So after he finished his higher education in philosophy, one of his first jobs as an academic was not as a professor, but as editor of Goethe's scientific writings.
That's an education for 50 people.
And so this is for what's it called? I can't remember what it's called. The prestige edition of Goethe's collected works. And I'm sure it just changed the way he saw everything.
Yeah.
So he's there, and this is he was born in 1861, so this is late 1880s probably by now, and This is also the time that the Theosophical Society is making a lot of inroads into European and American culture.
Madame Blavatsky.
Yes, right. And I don't know how it happened. Because here he is, this kind of mainstream academic, credentialed person. Then I don't know if he gets attracted to theosophy because he's interested in everything. And he starts giving lectures at the Theosophical Society in Germany. And he's wildly popular as a lecturer. And he gives lectures on kind of straight up theosophical kinds of topics like cosmic evolution, stuff like this. It's very esoteric, not Christian at all for the most part. And because he kind of left Christianity behind, even though he did say that at one point later he said, if things hadn't worked out this way, I would have become a Cistercian monk.
Right. I was aware of that.
Yeah. And so he gets into this. And if it's interesting, if you read his lectures, he published several books, but most of what we have by him in book form are from their lecture notes.
But let me stop you. When you say he was a wildly popular lecturer, I've read so many of the lectures, and I have to read them like 2 or 3 times. And I bet most people do. Mm-hmm. I want to ask you why, Berdyaev, or Berdyaev, you and I both really admire this Russian philosopher. We'll talk about him more. I was reading an autobiography of his. I forget the title, but he had once seen Steiner lecture. And I record Berdyaev just found him boring, but he probably had a visceral reaction because it was too far out, for Berdyaev in this sense. But when you said he was wildly popular, who was going to these things,
All kinds of people. I mean, the thing is, I remember, so where I used to live in Ferndale, Michigan, there is a branch of the Theosophical Society, and they've been there in Detroit forever. But I went in there, and they had some photographs on the wall, and one of them was from like the 1920s of an earlier place where they met. And there had to be 1,000 people in this. In this, it was a picture of the audience at one of the lectures. It was just the whole theosophical thing was a very popular at the time, and it was catching on. In fact, it's interesting. There's a movie called Fairy Tale, if you've seen it, and it's about the Codlingley fairies, where in England around the time of World War I. These little girls had allegedly taken photographs of fairies. Yeah. Right. And in the film, there's an interesting part where the mother of one of the girls goes to this lecture by a theosophist. And there's actually, in that one, there's hardly anybody in the audience. But it was a big deal back then.
Yeah. So you're saying theosophy was super popular. He was popular amongst other people who were lecturing. But it wasn't people were just drawn to him, but the material was really had captured the imagination of
and it was and it was a part of what they call the occult revival of the 19th and early 20th centuries,
right.
Which to me that it seems like a response or a romantic response to industrialization and the Industrial Revolution and all the things that were going on with that. People were saying no, and so another person who was kind of on a similar trajectory, even though born in similar times, is William Butler Yates, who also spent a little time hanging out with the Theosophists, Charles Williams as well. So he's in that environment, and then I don't know when it was exactly, but he turned again to Christianity. And he said that he had this profound inner experience of the reality of Christ and who Christ said he was.
He called it a festival of knowledge.
He did. That's exactly what he called it.
I always tried to think what that meant, like all this stuff pouring into him. Go ahead.
And he must have felt that. And so so around the same time when he's still hanging out with the Theosophists, Annie Besant and Charles W. Ledbetter were trying to make a deal with him because they were trying to push Krishnamurti as the new world teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And he was only a kid at the time, maybe he was 20, and they were the deal. This is according to the story I've heard. I don't know if this is really true, but I have a feeling it is. They wanted Steiner to be the John the Baptist in that scenario, and Steiner balked. He said, "No, I think I'll go start my own thing." And then he started what's now called the Anthroposophical Society.
Yeah.
So it was a breakaway group, and it was more Christocentric, still very esoteric. But it's interesting. Now, this is kind of controversial. If you read Steiner's lectures or books from the early 20th century, or even his philosophy of freedom, not the philosophy of freedom in this way, but the lectures, it's very characterized by theosophical jargon referring to the masters and cosmic evolution, which is Pralaya and Manvantara, which I don't want to explain, but it's a big Blavatskyan concept, which is basically it's importing Darwinian evolution into an esoteric space. I remember we talked to Guido. He thought Blavatsky was just doing the same thing that Darwin was.
Yeah.
So in the early lectures of Steiner, a lot of that stuff is still there. And if you look at the later lectures, close to when he died, I'd say the last 7 or 8 years, he died in 1925. Last 7 or 8 years before he died, it's very different. All that theosophical jargon has disappeared, and he's adopted his own language, which is much more Christocentric, right? And
but also less filled with jargon in particular, right?
And this is the thing, and
it's an incarnation in one sense.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But here's the thing. It's interesting with anthroposophists. I don't know if they're all like this. You point that out to them and they say, no, he was always exactly the same. He was always, but you can see him developing over time.
Yeah.
I mean, he had these tremendous gifts, and his insights and appreciation and love for Goethe really comes through. I mean, that's why he called the building. He was not an architect, but he learned how to be an architect and built this amazing building called the Goetheanum carved out of wood. Extraordinary that you can see. I guess from what I understand, it's still discussed in history of architecture courses as a marvel of, you could call it they kind of lump it in with Art Deco, but it's from that time where it was just a new way to do architecture, and Rudolf Steiner was not an architect.
Fascinating. And then that one was burned by arsonists. Am I right with that? And then the one that stands in Dornach, Switzerland now is not made of wood.
It's in cement, and it's not a very attractive building in my opinion.
I don't know what to make of it. It's cool looking, but I'm glad you say it's not attractive. It doesn't.
To me, that other one. I mean, the original.
It was attractive.
Photographs. It's miraculous looking.
Yeah. This notion of going from kind of religious theosophical jargon down to the practical, don't you think that's kind of what you and I are about here too? That we're looking to kind of move in one sense the same trajectory. That I don't mean to speak for you, but sitting here, I'm wondering if, again, you've heard me lately, I've been kind of singing the song that religion is the disease that Jesus came to cure us from.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of like sitting in one place, a church, to try and control events on the outside of the church, or maybe ahead of it in time. That's kind of a default position for all of us. It's not necessarily what the church teaches, but that's what I'm calling religion. And you and I are both, trying to not make it practical. Like, we got to find that right language. But that's why I said incarnation. 2,000 years ago, we would believe Christ came, and that like his presence now might be deeply incarnating still into the more practical fields. We're just not doing them. Our Catholic schools look just like public schools. Our hospitals look just like other hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
But Steiner Steiner, his hospitals, if I'm right, did not look like other hospitals. His medical
They still
practice,
don't. Yeah.
nothing that he did. His school. So should we jump into some of those a little bit?
Yeah. Well,
Let's
let's
say more. Yeah.
I think, what I have. I mean, I have a stack of 25 books by Rudolf Steiner right next to me, and it's not probably only half of what I've read, because I don't know what happened to the other 25. Lots of books that. What happened to the other book? I don't know what happened. But
Yeah.
for me, I mean, if you read that, a lot of his stuff you read, you're like, I can't make head or tail out of this. How do I apply this in human life? Do I just have to take your word for it? And he was certainly a person who did not want you to take his word for it.
Mhm.
But here's the thing. So, and this is what I think what's so important about him. So he had all these, very esoteric and, to some might say bizarre ideas about things. But then people would come to him with problems, serious problems, like, what do we do about agriculture? Or Emil Molt, who funded the first Waldorf school, because it was at his Waldorf cigarette factory. It was a school for the children of his workers, because he was so devastated by what happened to Europe through World War I. He turned to Steiner and said, what can we do to create something that won't let this happen again? Education, right? So, but the thing is, all these things that people came to Steiner with problems, he gave them very precise, practical things to do.
Yeah.
He gave
I
instructions.
keep on thinking of lately, I think of schools in the same way, so that what happened to us during COVID wouldn't happen again. Like,
Yeah.
what would the education of people look like for things to have, for people to have handled that differently, for our country to have handled that differently?
I do think if he were here today, he would come up with something different.
Mhm.
It would be similar to Waldorf, but I think it would be a very different thing, because he was when they came to him for Waldorf education, he was looking at the world as it was, and he didn't want to create something totally new. And he said that. I said, I'm not trying to, destroy education. I'm just trying to show how we have education right now, how we can make it better. That's all he was trying to do with that, and he did. And that's the thing that's amazing to me, with whether it's in education or in medicine or agriculture, which I'm intimately involved with, or beekeeping, or I'm missing a whole bunch of other things. They're all practical. They all work.
Yeah.
And you can look at anybody else. I mean, no one else has come up with that many insights in so many domains that are practical and they work.
Yeah. Guido would say his pharmacology is like a treasure gifted to the world, right?
Absolutely.
So
economics. I missed economics, right?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to weave through the show many, many times.
Mhm.
And we were discussing, we're having our good friend Tara back on soon here, maybe in 2 weeks, to focus specifically on education. But let's do education a little bit first. Give us like a little summary. Like, I think if I'm a listener and I don't know much, we're saying he's so different. He did things, he made them different. 2 or 3 things why that were completely innovative about Steiner's approach to education. That I'm going to ask you similar things about other fields.
Right. Well, so in Waldorf education, for instance, he came up with one of the main things he came up with that was, practical, but no one ever expected this, was in elementary school to have the children stay with the same teacher through all 8 years.
Like, knowing somebody well could suspiciously have an effect on,
which is, yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's so practical.
Right.
And though a lot of Waldorf teachers do go through all 8 years, but not everybody goes. I never went all the way through. I did a 3 through 8 because a teacher wasn't working out. I took over for her. I did 6 through 8, 7 through 8, and 7 through 8, or something like that. So so what would happen, people move on, people get married, their lives change. So I would be able to do that. And I happen to have a gift And in the place and time and where I was, this is the early 2000s, where you have a lot of boys in particular who are obviously lacking a father in the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be actually a good time for me to come in there, especially when they hit 12 years old, when they start to get A, mouthy, and B, looking for somebody who knows what he's talking about.
Right.
So I would go in those situations, which was very healing for a lot of those boys who didn't have fathers in the picture. Now I'm straying a little bit from the model there. So that's one thing he did, was have the idea of the class teacher staying with. Another thing was to have the arts imbue every subject. Everything's done artistically. There's lots of singing, recorder playing, learning through poetry. There was so much immersion in the arts, painting, etc. Lots of it, and even eurythmy, which is a form of movement that, like, I wouldn't call it like ballet, but it's people look at it and go, it's kind of like ballet. Developed by Steiner and his wife Marie, and so it's got all this stuff, but also practical skills like woodworking, like knitting, like sewing, which are gardening, which are added to the curriculum. And the product is, and I've seen this happen time and time again, is a kid who goes through, whether it's 8 years or 12 years of a Waldorf education, they come out not afraid of anything, because there's not an idea of tracking people to be, you're the smart scientific kid, or you're the musical kid, so you just go with the musical stuff, right? There's no idea. That's part of the blessing.
Did he address that specifically in any writings, meaning this tracking thing? So
tracking didn't exist when he was around,
right,
but and tracking is really let's not call it tracking, let's call it specialization.
Yeah. And if you had a curriculum to say, we have a curriculum based on the eradicating fear, that's a big draw to people.
Well,
fear is ubiquitous now,
Well, that's, what, he's a prayer, well, I call it a prayer, he wouldn't call it a prayer of his. I say regularly, we must eradicate from the soul all fear and terror of what comes out of the future. That's how it starts. Yeah. Because, and he delivered that to them during World War I, right? But, and so if you look at our current model with all this tracking business that goes on, this is because higher education creates lower education in its own image.
Yeah, right.
And higher education has become more and more specialized and less relevant.
One thing I've done, like when I worked up at the parish, I would do baptismal prep. And I don't know if it was guided by Steiner, but I found myself, when you hear yourself repeating things, you're having conversations, but like in each one, I would hear myself kind of going off on something that, and this is all kind of tangential, but I would tell parents that, like, when you have a baby or a child, and maybe it's because of working at the college, when I see people coming in, like when I went to college in 1986, I think half of my friends were undeclared. Now in an incoming class of 1,000 freshmen, I forget what the numbers are, but they could be less than 50 who are undeclared. And anyhow, when all of a sudden I was raising my own children, I've got 4 children, and you'd see other parents, and they would have, let's say, a son who played with like clocks, or a son who played with Band-Aids. And so we'll use the Band-Aids one. People would say, oh, Bobby is called to be a doctor. He's going to go for an MDiv, and they want to get him in clubs associated, not an MDiv, an MD.
Yeah.
But I would always tell people, can we keep those things for the child's sake vague and up in the air? Just say he seems to be interested in the healing arts, because maybe he's called to be an osteopath. Maybe he's called to be, any of the 1,000 different ways to approach health.
Or
but I'm getting some of that same vibe with Steiner. He was opening up. He wasn't constricting.
Right. And that's the whole, and that's part of the gift of being with the same teacher is, and plus you see the kids change over time.
Yeah.
Right. But you allow them the exposure to all these different domains. Not every kid's going to be an opera singer, but they can all sing a little bit. right? Not every kid is going to be an artist, but everybody gets a crack at painting and drawing. And in a Waldorf school, probably a more, I should have brought an example. One of the more beautiful things is the children don't have textbooks. They create their own book. So
say more. Yeah.
And we're going to talk about this when we talk to Tara, so I don't want to get too much into it. But the idea in what's called a main lesson, which is an extended period in the morning of about 2 hours, is that first, you'll start with, singing or poetry, you're playing the recorder, working, doing mental math just to wake the kids up, get them in their bodies, and some kind of movement. And then, so say I was teaching a block on the Renaissance. So I'd go out in the morning. So we did all this morning work, and then I go, okay, all right, you guys. So yesterday we talked about Michelangelo and his encounter with Pope Julius. What do you remember about that? So the kids would tell me, okay, yesterday we said this and this, and they would reconstruct the story that I gave to them. So there's a lot of storytelling about Michelangelo and Pope Julius. And then, okay, then I would take the story to the next place where I wanted to go. Maybe it was the commissioning of the Last Judgment, for instance, or whatever. So, and you bring out all these human details, which the kids just, we all love stories, and the kids learn through storytelling. And so after that, they'll have book work. So say the day before I was talking about, and sometimes it's a 2-day rhythm, some days it's a 3-day rhythm, but rhythm is important.
Okay.
So then in later grades, it's more of a 2-day rhythm. And then, so say we'll go to the book work. And so if the day before we were talking about Michelangelo and Pope Julius, I might give a dictation. I might ask the kids to draw a copy one of Michelangelo's paintings, or in colored pencil into their books. I could ask them to do any number of things. I mean, one thing I would often, when I taught that unit, I would have them copy out one of Michelangelo's sonnets into their books. There's one which he's complaining about painting the Sistine Chapel. I've grown a goiter dwelling in this den, is how it starts. This is bullshit. Yeah. But so that's an important part of a Waldorf education, is using rhythm, and using, when we used to say you have to use the night. So you tell them that story.
I'm switching chairs here. This one's creepy, but I'm hearing. Yeah.
So you tell them that story, and then they take it into their sleep, into their dream life, into their imaginative life.
Fascinating.
And it's really interesting to see what happens, what lights the kids up in that process. But it happens also in the sciences. I would, one of my favorite demonstrations in, I think it was 7th grade, we would turn the classroom into a camera obscura. So the kids would leave, say, on Wednesday afternoon. So Wednesday after they leave, I would get all this black paper and block out all the windows. And I would have blankets or towels or something to even block the cracks under the door. So when I turned off the lights, it was totally black. But I had a place on the window where I had a little hole I had cut, which I opened up. And after I said, just be quiet. They're like, of course, the kids are like, hey, shut up, stop touching me. But one kid farts or whatever. But I let their eyes adjust, and all of a sudden they go, wow. So where I did this, our classroom faced a road, a street, and you would see like a bus go by, but it would look like it was going across the ceiling the opposite way.
Right.
And I said, what just happened? And they'd say, can you explain it to us how this is all going on? No, we'll talk about it tomorrow. But you let them, I used to say self-imposed homework is the best kind. So they would be thinking about it.
Yeah.
And they would say, Mr. Meyer, what happens? I said, can't tell you. I'll tell
Yeah.
you. I'll tell you tomorrow. And
They say like, let it cook overnight.
that's right. And then one girl would say, oh, I hate when you do that because it's all I ever do is think about it. Which is the point, right?
Yeah.
So it's a really very practical, very human way to go about.
Yeah, and the other thing, that's implied, when I ran our local parish, I'm a layman. For a while, our parish, which was 5 former parishes, asked to work together. No priest in the diocese wanted it. Nobody said, I'm not going there. All the churches were fighting, so the bishop asked me to run it. And but we were so blessed to have the wonderful lady, I'll give her first name, Rebecca, who ran the confirmation program. I always thought it was the best thing really the parish did, but she was trained in Waldorf education. But what the young people who went through the program remember is, again, when you did, it seems small, but when you did an arts and crafts piece, it just wasn't crappy material, right?
Right.
You used good material. Yeah. And
no magic markers.
Right. And there was rhythm from week to week. It didn't feel like we have another unit, we have to get this material in you. So, and you and I, this isn't, this would be even for another one, not even with Tara. But, some of what you and I, how we met is kind of the marriage of Waldorf and, and Catholic education, looking for more insights, cross-fertilization there. And there's somebody you were close to whose writings I read, but I didn't know him personally like you did, but Stratford Caldecott, who was really moving on that front.
Yeah.
And people can look for his books if you happen to be Catholic and you're looking for good introductions of how this could play out in faith formation classes or in schools. The last name Caldecott, Stratford Caldecott. He's got, I think, 3 books kind of on the theme of education.
Yeah, few. And that's the sad thing is, we had been emailing Stratford.
He was going to come to your conference, wasn't he?
I don't know if he's going to. He was interested. I don't think he could come, but
okay.
But we were actually starting to talk about doing something on education together. And then he got sick with cancer. So it was too bad.
What do you think were you talking about, like a prototype school?
Oh, we were just starting to talk about it.
Yeah.
But he didn't have any teaching experience. So he didn't know the hands-on, and I did. And he had a lot of great ideas about bringing beauty into education, right? Very Balthasarian, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And if you look at Balthasar, right, who was steeped in Goethe, and Steiner, who was steeped in Goethe, I think of Steiner education as, Goethe's saying that if a man has art and science, he has religion. But if he doesn't have art or science, give him religion, right?
Yeah, I think.
But Steiner education really brings science, art, and what Steiner would call reverence. He would say, if you can't bring a child to reverence, how will they ever be able to raise their hands in blessing as an old person? Right. So it's very people come into a Waldorf school for the first time and they think they just walked into this most beautiful atmosphere. I remember the first time I went to one, I was just blown away out with all this singing of children and all this color. I mean, there's the teachers use colored chalk on a black chalkboard. There are reasons for it, but you're just imbued with beauty. And then you would, like my own experience in public school and Catholic school, I always, what's this preparing people for? Prison.
Yeah.
Prison or working in an office. And the environment makes
there's a great YouTube video. It's like when YouTube was new, but it was one of the first ones I looked up. So two Ivan Illich connections with Steiner. One is that Rudolf Steiner was Ivan Illich's grandfather's astrologer, we think. And we know that Steiner was a frequent visitor to the Illich home on the Isle of Dalmatia off Croatia. So that, a book needs to be written.
Yeah.
Why do I vibe so well with Illich? But a book needs to be written, or at least, a major paper on how deep was Steiner's influence on Illich, right?
That's interesting. Wow.
It is. It's very interesting. The other one would be what you were just saying, schools training us for prisons. There used to be a great little video. I'm sure that I know the title, so I can put it out there. It's called Scary School Nightmare. But it's kind of a cartoon character in front of a series of just pictures of random schools across the country. And then she says quotes from Ivan Illich, but they all look the same and they look like prisons.
Well, the school I went to in Detroit, I went through 4th grade. I mean, it had, chains on the windows, or what do they call it? Kind of a grill, a metal grills across the windows. Why?
Yeah.
For what?
Safety. Yeah. Let me ask you,
70s.
We've been saying some good things about Waldorf schools, but for everything, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. I had a student who, when she went through school here, you could tell was going to be one of the most gifted educators. She is an educator now, but she did some time, I think, student teaching or maybe teaching in a Waldorf school. This was on Long Island. And she said, the parents were nuts. And so she had to kind of leave that school. Also, that you and I mentioned that at a key moment, and I think I could go. So if you've read maybe 50 books, I've read at least 20, and in so many papers. But his worldview is the most Christocentric thing, whether you like that or not. You need to know that the way he saw all of history leading to Christ and leading from Christ onto the world of spirit, it's the most Christocentric thing. All things go through Christ.
Funny.
And I think it's been your experience too. I remember talking with you that so many of the schools run from that part of Steiner, like the plague.
Or they downplay it, or they downplay it.
Yeah. And do you think that really compromises the education? Can you, it's, kind of like taking Christ out of Christmas or something.
Well, it is. I used to be a teacher trainer. I would taught a lot of schools, but I was also a professor in a teacher training institute for a long time. I was a mentor and a master teacher. I'd fly all over the country and help people learn how to be better teachers. I'll never forget, I had this really wonderful experience teaching in a teacher training institute in Ann Arbor. It was a summer program. I loved it. It was a fun job. And then after the class, the students said, "You want to come out with us for dinner?" So I went out to dinner with them. And they were, one of them I remember was talking, it's like the hardest thing. He goes, "What was the hard thing for you to get used to?" "I just couldn't get past Jesus." And just yesterday I saw on Facebook, somebody was inquiring, I was really interested in Waldorf education, but they went to a school and it seemed so Jesus-y.
Yeah.
It was Steiner like that? I thought he's an atheist. I'm like, good God.
It's so funny.
But the danger with Waldorf schools, and this is not the fault of, I don't think it's the fault of the education itself or the people who try to promote this education. It just had the world as it is because Waldorf is, the methods of Steiner have not been taken up by the mainstream, which is what he wanted. He didn't. It becomes because then it's a private school and a pricey one at that.
Yeah.
So then it becomes a boutique.
Yeah, that's my experience. So I mentioned you could abdicate on some of his more outlandish esoteric beliefs. They could run from those. They run again from the Christocentrism. But I think what this student who taught there and some other people, and I think our friend Guido, who taught at a Waldorf school out in California, would say it was the elitism of it,
And I was a little protected from that at the school I taught. It was in inner city Detroit. Okay. And the school was dedicated to racial integration. I mean, so I'd have students, black, white kids, very few, once in a while an Asian kid, but people would say, "What's the racial makeup of your class?" And I'd go, "Wow, I don't know. Let me count. I don't know." I just wasn't, and people were offended in higher education that I couldn't just say, "I have 7 African Americans and 6," because I did not think of them, my students, like that. I thought of them. In fact, if you're a Waldorf,
a name and a face.
If you're a Waldorf teacher, you call your class "my kids."
Yeah.
my kids are, well, I don't think of them in terms of race.
Yeah.
And boy, I got into I almost came to blows with somebody in higher education because when I moved out of Waldorf education and became a professor, they all knew I was the Waldorf teacher, so I would get invited to do all this imaginative education stuff, and none of them knew what they're doing really.
Yeah.
But they like we're going to do arts. I said, well, what's your philosophy for doing the arts? We don't have one. We're just going to do arts. Okay, good God.
That is so funny. That's
and I was in this one meeting with this education prof, and I told her, I said, I don't know. I could never tell you. I mean, I'd have to think about it. And I had some kids who were biracial. How do I count them? Where do they fit in? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in this meeting, I said, okay, well, I know what I'm talking about, and you don't. Okay. So I want to leave right now. And the other person, like, Michael, because I do have an Irish temper when it comes. It doesn't come out very often, but it comes out once in a while.
How about if we, maybe showing the microcosm or the macrocosm in the microcosm? Let's do another area. We're not going to get to all of them, but like, what one do you want to talk about? Medicine, or you want to talk
Well,
about?
I think what's important, and this touches in everything Steiner does,
okay,
spiritual development, childhood development, is his anthropology, which is in one sense, very medieval, but it's also not very medieval. It's very future oriented. Now, and this is the part that scares people off. So when Steiner talks about, and I'll give you the simple version of what constitutes a human person. He would say a human person has a physical body, which we all know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
An etheric body, which what the heck's that? He has an astral body, which another term that scares people off, and an ego. And he talks now in education, he talks about, and that's why the education is based around when these different, he calls them sheaths, appear or become pronounced in the human constitution. Now, it might sound crazy to us, but if you go to medieval philosophy, they said the same thing, but they didn't say etheric body. They said vegetable soul.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't say astral body. They said animal soul.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't say ego. They might say the I or the self.
Yeah, and was the ego? Could we even say the ego was still in its germinal stage, at that time?
And when we say ego, people will often misconstrue that as
self-centeredness.
Self-centeredness was not what he's talking about at all. So if you think about, and this fits into a kind of Aristotelian, ideas of the temperaments, mm-hmm. right? And earth, air, fire, and water, right? The elements. Mm-hmm. So you think of the physical body. We have a physical body. Now, when a baby is born, one of the things that you have to do with a child right away is regulate not only their sleeping and eating, right? So it's all about the rhythm, right? Stroking the baby, bath time, all this kind of stuff. And that, you would say, is coming to the development of the etheric body, which Steiner says is complete. Well, I shouldn't say complete, but it comes to its apex at around the age of 7.
Okay.
Now, what happens?
Also say we share that with plants, right? Plants have an etheric body, but no astral body or ego.
And we, of course, the human person has all those things, but they're not as developed as they go through life, or from birth. And then what happens at the age of 7? Their teeth fall out, and that's why in a Waldorf school, that is the time you start teaching reading. Mm-hmm. Because they're ready for intellectual work.
I think I've told you that just in the country of Russia, not in a lot of favor at this time here in the USA, but it's my understanding, for one of the most literate cultures in the history of the world, that not just that they produce Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, but just the people read, and they read difficult stuff. But mm-hmm. that it's anathema to teach reading before the age of 7 In Russia, you just don't do it. They would say if one of your numerous kids, Mike, was clamoring to say, "Daddy, Daddy, I need to learn this," then my understanding is that Russian people will do it. But the image of us trying to like bring phonics into
Pushing it on,
2-year-olds, it's counterproductive.
Because we had to get them into Harvard by the time they're 12.
Yeah. And then they lose, I think they lose the gift for poetry because those early stages, raising my own kids, I'm thinking of my oldest daughter, Mary. We didn't teach her to read until much later, but it allowed her a very protracted period of gifted with, the sounds, just bum, sum, flum, gum. And that's given her a lifelong aptitude for poetry, which I'm convinced is ruined when you take that winged bird. Illich wrote a book with a guy, Barry Sanders, not the football player, called ABC and the Alphabetation of the Human Mind or something. Yeah. But it really gave me this image that when these words are out there and they're flowing, then you can take an alphabet and any sound that comes out of my mouth, you could technically spell it. He's given me this image that you've taken that winged fun bird that flapped and you put it on the ground like a science experiment. You've pinned its wings to the dissection.
We murdered to dissect. That's right.
Yeah, it's right there. And that too early when the human body is playing with words, let that stage last as long as it can.
And Steiner would also say that if you bring in intellectualization too early, that's going to result in health problems later.
That's great.
So that's why rhythm is such an important time at that stage in a child's life, which is why songs and nursery rhymes, like you were saying, and all these kinds of things are helpful, but also regular bedtime, regular meal time, because that's what creates health.
Yeah,
it really does. And if you don't do that, you create a nervous child.
Mm-hmm.
Nervous child has, becomes a magnet for illness and sickness and disease, even. Right? You think about, I can imagine what Steiner would say about online schooling, but so that's one thing. So that happens about this age of 7, which we bring intellectualization in now with more abstract thought, and then.
This is all there in Piaget too, in one sense, right?
It is. Play is the work of the child.
Mm-hmm.
No, they threw him out of the window too. Then comes the astral body, which is, when that happens, 13 or 14, right? All of a sudden, girls, check it out. I didn't know we had girls in this room. Where did they come from?
Yeah.
Right. That's the birth of the astral body.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we share with animals, right?
Yep.
It's the desire body, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a weakened etheric body, when that thing comes in, it hits the kid. And again, you want to strengthen each one of those things.
So say you didn't complete the sentence. So if you have an undeveloped etheric body, and the astral body comes, what does it do?
Well, it's like you have holes.
It doesn't have a proper container. They become their hormones or something, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you got no buffer to contain that, right?
There's no tail wags the dog.
Yeah, and of course, then that's also a time when children get interested in drugs and stuff like that too, right?
Yeah.
Which
fascinating.
And of course, then the birth of the ego, which comes after that, after the astral body.
What age do they typically associate with that?
Well, really, I would say 21, right?
Okay, yeah.
But as the child or as a person is developing, you go through these things, and they're all present at the same time, but the one or another is accentuated or more prevalent at a certain period,
mm-hmm.
right? And that's just very. Again, it might sound esoteric, but it's very practical.
It is.
Right. And he's not the only one. I mean, Maria Montessori.
She saw a lot of this. Yeah.
She did. And she based all of her insights about what things are age appropriate based on dentition.
Mm-hmm.
So
she did too.
Yeah. So
so I must not know enough about her.
Baby teeth come in at 1, right? Child learns how to walk at 1.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that movement to upright is important. When they learn to speak, it takes a while, right? And when does a child first say I?
I'm guessing boy, me, they can refer to themselves as like me, Aiden, 7 years old, or is it earlier?
I think it's
earlier.
early. It's
Yeah.
well, Steiner put it, and of course, it varies. Is around the age of 3,
Okay.
right? Which is a very interesting development. But people weren't paying attention to stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second dentition, when they lose the baby tooth, then the loss of the 12-year molars, which is when they get sassy, right? The 12-year molars, and then they call them wisdom teeth for a reason. When do those come in?
13, 14,
18.
15. Oh, see, I don't even
17,
know
18, 19.
I
Yeah.
must have skipped that, the series of lectures on biology.
And it's interesting. There's a guy who knows a little bit about Steiner, but he doesn't use him. But he's an Irish Canadian educator named Kieran Egan, and he kind of uses the same thing, but he talks about what kinds of understandings are available to children at these different stages. So I mean, so these are really very practical, but enormously useful things.
Don't you think that, like, in somebody's reading of Steiner, that same stuff is the biggest put off, but I would encourage people. So my experience reading Steiner is, obviously I approached him through education. I think I saw the shortcomings of the Catholic school system as it was kind of operating. I was looking for variations, like, why can't we be unique or do something that isn't so
stupid,
rigid? Yeah, like 6 to the half dozen, everything. But so I didn't know much about him, but I started reading something. I did see that you wouldn't do this until the baby teeth had fallen out, and that can be a real put off. But I'm going to encourage people, stay with it for a while. Then it starts to make sense, as you say. Like, you kind of see, you get a feeling that he's seeing connections maybe that we didn't see. Then the flip side of that is, then some people, they start to say that this guy is not full of shit. Then they can turn him into a god too, right? And that's the
it's the other side.
Yeah, that's and you got to steer your own boat. You've said many times, like, Steiner did not ask for like worshipers. And he wanted to give people the tools and the seeds to think those thoughts through themselves. But you and I have both met people who just kind of live a life as if, like Steiner says, are the two most important words.
Yeah, we used to when I was a Waldorf teacher, a few friends of ours, we had 2 games we would play at faculty meeting. It was we had a bullshit card. Like, if people used enough anthroposophical jargon and you filled up your bingo card, you could yell out bullshit.
That's great. Yeah.
Which would piss people off. And we were also said, Steiner says, because you get a lot of Steiner says people in anthroposophy or Waldorf schools. And we would get sick of hearing this. We'd say, Steiner says, put your hands on your head.
Yeah.
Steiner didn't say, right?
Yeah. That just goes to the fact that, like, when people say they're not religious, this is Chestertonian, but they're going to turn a religion. They're going to make a religion out of the nearest
out
thing
of something. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And that's the with Steiner. I mean, like you said, he told people, don't take my word for it.
Yeah. Try
it out, see if it works.
Yeah.
Which, to go back to beekeeping, there's a great passage in his book on beekeeping, which I don't know if I brought that one down, where Mr. Mueller, Herr Mueller, is giving Steiner some trouble, because when Steiner did this in the early 1920s, the modern beekeeping methods had just been in effect for a little while, 20, 30 years. And he said, if you keep doing it this way, you're going to end up with sick bees. It might happen tomorrow, but it'll happen. And Herr Mueller was saying, well, we're having such good, honey production and this and that. And he said, yeah, I understand. Yeah. And I think in the short term, you will have great honey production. But do me a favor, check back with me in 50 to 80 years. We'll see who was right.
Yeah, down to the day, huh?
Yeah. He called it on what happened with colony collapse disorder and varroa mites. And, he was right on the money.
Yeah.
And even with the varroa, so people started treating for varroa right away. Like, and of course it took 20 years, and then some really insightful beekeepers who weren't necessarily knew about Steiner They said, you know what? If we would have just left it alone, the bees would have taken care of this problem by now.
Huh.
By our intervention, we made it worse.
Yeah, we know that's true in other areas, that
Yeah.
things that would have taken care of themselves. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard of
Like
the ringing cedars series out of Russia?
I don't think so.
It's really fascinating. You'd like it. I don't know what to make of it, but there's this lady, her name is Anastasia. There's this author, Vladimir Megre, who just says he met this lady. It's just fictionalized or something, but she just kind of, there's these people from Eastern Europe, like, there's several others I could name. I'm trying to think of who I've been reading recently, but these people in Eastern Europe who just kind of walk out of the woods and they know stuff like Steiner.
Mhm.
But so anyhow, this Anastasia, this lady who lives in the Taiga and seems to know stuff, she was talking about beekeeping in a chapter. Maybe there's 13 books in the series. I think it was the first one. But I'd read Steiner on bees. But she was saying, and I don't know if it's in Steiner, she said that bees hate sharp corners. Have you come across that in Steiner's? So she's, they love logs, beehives and logs. She goes, but if you bought like a beehive like I bought, and I admit to not having done this, she gave me the impression that we should put like Sculpey clay in the corners, that bees just do not like square angles. But I love, the more you read Steiner, the more I just love absurd tips like that. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but somebody could say like bees are terrified of that stuff. Like Temple Grandin, though it's a great book she wrote, Being Autistic, that she goes like cows would find this terrifying, and she revolutionized it. This lady said, bees hate right angles.
Makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
there are plenty of right angles in my beehives, but
Okay, yeah.
But some people, there's a woman named Ruta Hallam who does great work with this, and she does not use Langstroth or square hives or rectangle. She goes back to the old skeps, which when they used to make them out of straw.
Okay.
And she has modified things. She does beautiful work. She lives in England and does great things. In fact, for people listening or watching right now, what a great thing to check out would be this documentary. It's about 4 or 6 hours long. It's long. It's 2 parts. Is The Challenge of Rudolf Steiner.
And if you break it apart into the component ones on YouTube, there could be like 13 hours, right?
Oh yeah, because they
so
have
the documentary was the best. Yeah. So find them all. I've watched, I think, all of the longer versions.
And it's absolutely worth watching.
Yeah.
And you get a real, and I think it was a great presentation of Steiner. There have been some really horrible documentaries done on biodynamic farming, which make it look like a fruit cake farm, just nuts.
Right.
But the guy who put that Challenge of Rudolf Steiner together, he talked to people who work in every domain of Steiner's work, in medicine, architecture, finance, farming, education, etc. And you get a real sense of not only the contributions of Rudolf Steiner, which are immense, and I don't think there's anybody who can even compare.
No, in one sense, so again, I don't want to put words, Tara Teak, and Guido. I'm just saying, like, really smart people. Like Tara's saying, like, Steiner is kind of like saving her faith right now, right? So here's somebody that, our listeners can listen to a previous interview. She'll be back on. I met her through writings at Front Porch Republic. Again, like I mentioned how we met over your book, Michael, Transfiguration. But, I've always read just kind of weird stuff. But here, I also see people for whom they weren't necessarily drawn to the kind of the far out, but they're, if you're feeling dried up and desiccated in this world, for a very intuitive, very smart person, our friend Tara, when in the wake of COVID and everything, where it seemed like everything was falling apart, she's just, and it'll be great to talk to her about this, but she just feels like it's therapeutic, that you read somebody who sees connections between things. The whole world is dividing things. But you see somebody who weaves connections in a very intuitive, I'm going to say, a very feminine brain, very gifted kind of right part, the poetic part of the brain. Steiner, reading him is difficult as it is. People find it healing, right? And again, Guido Preparata, who was trained at just elite schools, didn't know Steiner from a hole in his head, but just started reading it and recognized the genius in it.
Yeah.
Some of it's kind of nuts and tough. But so it's not just that people who are raised in Waldorf families and people who are kind of vaguely hippie-ish, and everybody can say, yeah, that's pretty cool that they use like nice fabrics and so forth. It's to say most people that I know who do anything from Steiner, they had to walk in kind of cold. Like I had nobody to introduce me. I just had heard the name and I wondered what the whole thing was about. And again, my gateway drug, a very good one, was Owen Barfield. And I'll mention again that, of the Inklings, to me, Charles Williams and Owen Barfield are far more interesting than Lewis and Tolkien. But not everybody feels that way. But Barfield, C.S. Lewis, I believe, was quoted as knowing that he was in the presence of an intellectual superior around Barfield. Barfield was just so brilliant and wrote these, crazy, wonderful books. But he said, and everybody else, they're afraid of Steiner, who like Barfield. That's another whole phenomenon. The people who like Barfield, who want to like pretend
Steiner never existed.
Yeah, I never met the man. I met the man. But Barfield said, in somebody saying like, how does your work relate to Steiner? I think he was offered the metaphor of like a bucket from a drop, that he was a drop in a bucket. He said, no, I'm a drop in a gushing geyser of water, and so I can't process that, but it seems like the more Barfield read, and I'm trying to give people entrance points, Owen Barfield to Rudolf Steiner, the more Barfield read, the more he just thought it was bottomless,
I think so.
Yeah.
And I think that's that my own experience, right? Here's a little personal anecdote. So I left Waldorf teaching in 2007, and I'd been practicing biodynamic gardening and for 20 years at that point. And I was kind of mad, so I was protesting. So I wasn't reading Steiner. Wasn't doing any Steiner kind of stuff.
Why were you mad? I think I missed it.
Because I had my parting with my old Waldorf.
Oh, gotcha. So you're kind of pissed at the whole world.
I was pissed at the whole world, yeah. But it was, I guess it was, maybe I was working on my dissertation. And I remember realizing, because there was a lot of stuff on sociology in my dissertation, which was not I was not trying to write sociology. I was just writing about 17th century Protestant mystics, and there was a lot of sociology inhabiting their stuff. And I said, wow, you know what? All the things you're talking about, I would not have any insights into had it not been for my study of Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah, interesting.
Then I realized I was like, wow, the way I think is so formed in a certain way by my relationship to Rudolf Steiner and being a Waldorf teacher and all this other stuff. So I said, all right. And then that's why by the time, when I wrote The Submerged Reality and Transfiguration, in fact, especially in Transfiguration, there's a lot of Steiner in that book. Yeah. Because I had accepted that my relationship to Rudolf Steiner. Well, you know what I mean? Because I think I had to distance myself from him.
Oh, sure.
And from the whole movement, just to see who I was. You know what I mean? Like,
do you think some people distance themselves from the Catholic Church and then they see the Gospels clearly again, right?
Mm-hmm. And then I could go back in with not being an acolyte or something, right? Not being a devotee, but I mean, certainly somebody who really, appreciates what Rudolf Steiner did for me. And
another entrance point, I think, there's a number of, to be honest, Michael, I've gotten so many nice comments about this podcast from people who join like the YouTube channel, the Regeneration podcast YouTube channel, or this podcast. When they sign up to join, quite often they'll leave notes, and people are it's very flattering. But you get a sense a lot of them are kind of familiar with maybe what we'd call the Catholic worldview, or certainly Christian. But so another entrance point for some people could be, and this book will come up a lot in the name, but Valentin Tomberg's, Meditations of the Tarot, because we had mentioned von Balthasar, right? And still, I don't know if von Balthasarians want to run from this connection, but von Balthasar's afterword to this very esoteric book called Meditations of the Tarot, we need to know that Valentin Tomberg was, in one sense, the heir apparent to Rudolf Steiner in the Anthroposophical movement. And then he got baptized and converted to Catholicism. And then he wrote this book. But again, that book, I worked in a Trappist monastery. You mentioned the Cistercians. Heavy hitters amongst the Trappist monks, names Basil Pennington, Thomas Keating. Those are some of the best-selling monastic authors in the 20th century. Both of those have dust jacket blurbs saying the equivalent of, this is the most amazing work written since the 12th century. And what they mean by that are the highlights of, say, Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. So that's high praise indeed. And so by playing with that book, you get to see a mind like von Balthasar. And I think you and I both agree. We know that Pope Benedict was exposed to this book, how deeply he read it. And so was John Paul II. Yep. But so you'll see somebody who knew the whole Steiner corpus and how they distilled it. They kind of left the movement, but still how influential Steiner was, indirectly through Tomberg, unlike these uber Catholic Trappist monks.
Yeah, you can't.
And von Balthasar. Yeah.
If you know Steiner and you read Tomberg, you see it's all over.
It's all over. Yeah.
It's all over.
Yeah. Fascinating. So tell me again, so I'm trying to think of entrance points for people too who might be somewhat interested. What would you recommend for people? Certainly the Challenge of Rudolf Steiner, can't say enough about that.
I think that's a great basic entrance. Then you'll see the range of things he was doing.
We hope to have a lot of those people on this podcast over the course of the years.
Yeah. But depending on your interest, I think the easier things to read are the more practical things.
Yeah.
Like his book on agriculture is challenging. It's more of his sense of humor and personality comes through in it. Yeah. Same thing with the educational stuff. And I think his book, The Kingdom of Childhood, which is a really easy book for people to get into his thought and see what he's getting at.
Yeah.
Also, I think when I was starting to get into him, the first book that I thought was really comparatively easy to read by him was a book that's very little read. It's called The Redemption of Thinking.
Okay.
And it's about Thomas Aquinas, which is that's a great book.
I'll have to read that. I've never, I actually think it's a very good entrance point, despite the name that could appeal to people's egos or Jungian inflation. But, the book called How to See Higher Worlds, there was 2 copies in my local state university library, but it's very sober. I told you how Trappist monks I know read it and said, it sounds very Catholic to me. It's just so sober, because Steiner pulls no punches, and the way I would describe what is a higher world to him, it occurs to me, whether there's a reference to this in the book or not, or it was just a kind of an image I got, that you could have DuPont Plastics Corporation make a plastic seed that looked exactly like a sunflower seed, right? And or something, and you could have 500 of those seeds on the table. 10 of them were plastic. And you get a sense that you practice these simple things in that book, How to See Higher World, and Steiner could go out there and tell you which ones are the plastic ones really easy.
Which just means it's how to see this world.
Yeah. Yep.
How does or is one of our favorite words, how to see the real.
How to see the real. Yeah.
Right. Because that's
and he's going to tell you that you're not doing any of these exercises without 7 steps in kind of moral work, becoming a better person, so that this doesn't go to your head. People don't know the dangers of that. In fact, Tomberg's work, the Meditations, he has big warnings against the dangers of inflation when you go into this stuff. But Steiner, I think he was doing the world a favor because he talked about this stuff in such a grounded, real way. For example, he would say, that he must have seen things. So if I told, where I'm sitting now, I've been in with students, that I think it's interesting to say, in order, one exercise he'll give is to say, look at growing things, like maybe daffodils bursting out of the ground in early spring. And he'll say, now think of the feeling you get when you see a sunrise, when you do this exercise. And he's trying to open different faculties. Makes perfect sense to me. And I've done it a lot.
And that's, you can tell this is from being grounded in phenomenology, right?
Yeah. And then he'll say, you would think then, if he's going to say, now look at dying things, you might think of a sunset. But his answer is no, you think of a moon rise. So you watch dying things that are decomposing, and then you feel the feelings inside yourself as if you were watching a moonrise.
Right.
And so this is how somebody who was a clairvoyant can help kind of lead us to perceive more. I think your book,
to intuitive thinking, that's what he calls it.
Yeah. And your book, this emerged reality. I think when you're talking about von Balthasar and you talk about Steiner in that book, a common theme for you, and I know it's in all your writings, is to see more, right? To raise the levels of perception.
Right.
When we had Therese Shaker on, she was mentioning, this most simple image is, color blindness,
Mhm.
that, some people can perceive more. And, once we realize that maybe some people, so the people who can see color can perceive more than the colorblind, the
Mhm.
people who perceive synesthesia, these connections.
Yeah.
Steiner's just trying to say we can all raise our level of perceptions. And is that crazy, or is it just prudent and practical? I think it's practical.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Final words, my friend.
Final words. I mean, we must eradicate from the soul all fear and terror of what comes out of the future. We must acquire serenity in all feelings and sensations about the future. We must look forward to whatever comes with absolute equanimity, and we must think that whatever comes is given to us by a world direction full of wisdom. It is part of what we must learn in this age, namely, to live out of pure trust without any security in existence, trusting in the ever-present help of the spiritual world. Truly, nothing else will do if our courage is not to fail us. So let us discipline our wills and let us seek the awakening within ourselves every morning and every evening.
That's awesome. When COVID was first kind of descending on this world and the associated madness, somebody posted that online. Could have been you. You saw it many places. It was the most poignant thing at that time, right? Just wishing people could look at this. Yeah, look at it. Look at this world without fear and with
medicine for our times.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We'll see you next week. And thank you, listeners, for listening to the Regeneration podcast. Have a good week.
Bye, friends.